Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Namofsky. On today's episode, we're discussing capital market exchanges and women-led public companies. Now, Mary Anne, before we went to the break, I had asked you a question. What have been the recent challenges and opportunities in the Canadian public markets? And you talked about the challenges. What about the opportunities?
I think one of the great opportunities for the Canadian marketplace in particular right now is the growth of the continued electrification of the economy and, the coming online of battery plants that we've seen. And there's a huge opportunity, and we've seen a lot of new companies coming to market in the mining space in particular for critical battery minerals and metals. Not that that's a big place where women tend to play a big role, but we're hoping to see more and more of that. And I think in particular, Canadian companies have a great opportunity, whether they're mining in Canada or internationally.
So how does an executive team at a company go about taking their company public? Because you talk about, or people have talked about, private companies versus publicly traded companies. But what if somebody watching has a private company and they think, I want to take it to the next level, but it's way too complicated. I don't know what to do.
That's a great question. And it's, fairly well articulated in terms of what the process is. We have it all on our website, and it's fairly consistent across the board. You need to be a reporting issuer in a jurisdiction in Canada. There are qualifying requirements that one needs to meet. There are, documents that need to be filed. So it does take a bit of a village. There is some heavy lifting. There needs to be involvement from investment bankers, dealers, lawyers, accounting firms. And it's really important to look at those requirements ahead of time, because sometimes it takes some time, including like needing 3 years of audited financial statements and all the disclosures that are required in order to go public. But it's a tried and true sort of process, and the exchange works very well with all of those advisors that assist companies in doing that.
Well, it doesn't sound as onerous and arduous that it may play in people's minds. So I want to talk about the statistics of numbers of women CEOs of publicly traded companies.
Very consistent with one of your earlier shows that talked about women on boards. Mm-hmm. The numbers are not big. And in terms of percentages, it's keeping about the same, but that doesn't mean the numbers aren't improving. So they are still small. TSX listed companies, the top 60, there are no female CEOs there. So we continue to see very small numbers of female CEOs in publicly traded companies. Even though the number of companies is growing, the percentage of female CEOs is not necessarily growing at the same pace.
I'm actually surprised that there aren't any female-led CEOs.
In the top 60.
In the top 60. That's surprising to me. I know that NYSE, NASDAQ, they all have guidelines set that you need X amount of females or diversity, equity, inclusion. They've got this whole thing put together for their boards and their CEOs. Do we have such a thing in Canada?
Absolutely, we do. In 2014, the Ontario Securities Commission actually had done some consultation and put out some requirements involving disclosure of women participation on boards and executive levels at publicly traded companies. It was more a disclose or explain why. There's been some follow-on consultations and roundtables, both by the Canadian Securities Administrators and by the OSC. It is largely about reporting and not necessarily having targets. And there's continuing conversation around what's the impact of that? What impact is that driving on the disclosure front? And what impact would targets have? So there is continuing conversations at the regulatory level there.
I know that Globe and Mail has, it's a yearly thing that they do. It's a survey, and it's Women Lead Here.
Yes.
And they will grant a company, the Women Lead Here logo if they have, top C-suite, female-led companies that are publicly traded, which I think is really good, because I think it helps companies get to that next level.
Absolutely. So, while saying that there is a requirement to report and not necessarily have targets, we really have seen a move forward in the numbers as a result of some of the work the regulators have done here in Canada.
So again, less than a minute to go to the commercial break, but I want to talk about the average returns for women-led companies compared to index returns. What are they?
So there's some great research and numbers out there showing that women-led companies, again, the numbers I have are from TSX-listed companies, where the returns from 2020, for instance, were 10 and 20% higher than the relative composite indices. Now, that sounds great. And there's lots of other reports that support that. I think the important thing is to dig through the details and understand that we're comparing apples to apples in all of this research. But there are multiple reports that support that. And it's important for people to understand that the details are critical to understand really why is that.
Okay, well, we'll be right back with more of capital markets, securities exchanges, and women-led companies.